Is everyone else in Canada?
Yeah, we're in Canada, I think. Where are you, Mark? In Windsor?
Yeah, so the recording has started. Thank you so much, Fatma, for joining us and fixing this for me. And now we can move on to the presentations.
Okay, so can I start?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So I just want to say that because maybe everybody maybe we are in the different time zone. So welcome to join our presentation. So with this the conference. So we are going to talk about the English conversation group for international students we did in Lidi Library. So we have a presentation team. The first presenter is Karen Pilan. She is our associate university librarian, and she's going to talk about the history of the the English conversation group. The second presenter is Dr. Rong Luo, and she's our database data librarian. I'm so sorry. And she's going to talk about your strategy and for online teaching and for English conversation group. The second, the presenter is Roger Carter. So I'm sorry, maybe I pronounce your name not very well. Anyway, so she's our electronic resources librarian, and he is going to talk about the outcomes and challenges for organizing the ECG, English Conversation Group. So by the way, I'm the metadata librarian and working in the Lidi Library. Today I'm in my office, and you can see my background is the break. So anyway, so we are very happy to be here, and so welcome to Karen for the first presenter. Thank you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. Like Sushan said, my name is Karen Pilon, and my hair is in a ponytail today, and I have glasses on and a striped colored shirt. And to my right, I have a bookcase, and I'm in a room that is green. So to start for our presentation, this has been going on for a very long time, and we're so proud of this initiative at the library. But this initiative didn't really come from any of us. It came from a co-op student who was with us. Her name is Yayo Umetsubo, who now works as a scholarly communication and liaison librarian at the U of T Mississauga campus. And she brought this to me in August of 2013. At that time, I was the librarian who liaised with international students, as Sushen does right now. And during that time, she brought this to me and asked if she could start an English conversation group for international students. Yayo was an international student herself at the University of Toronto, and she had been in similar programs and asked, it was very successful for her, and she wanted to try to do it here because at the University of Windsor, we have many, many international students. And so she thought that this would be a good idea. As a mentor to her, and of course, as somebody who was in a position to be able to make these decisions with her, I was able to say, yes, I would love to be able to help you with that. Roger, if you could just go back, I just want to make sure that I covered all the things. And so one of the things that Yayo said was that she wanted to offer international students a fun time to speak about history and art and the culture of Canada, but also that the classes would focus on non-academic materials, but she wanted to integrate library materials into each class. Okay, next. Thank you so much. And so how did we develop this? So with the principles that we wanted really librarians to be seen as mentors and as campus collaborators. And those things are important because many times, and it might be different in different universities, but librarians may not be seen, they're really pigeonholed into a box, right? And a lot of people don't understand what librarians do, and especially may not be appreciative of the fact that we are teachers and we do collaborate with many people on campus. So this was one of the things that we really wanted to highlight. And we knew that we could do it through this program because we would invite people from the campus to also come to speak to the students. So that was part of what we were thinking there. And also, Yayo really saw the librarian role as the problem solver, so that when there were issues in the university, we could be seen as somebody to call upon once we were accepted as a campus partner and a campus collaborator. People would call upon us and use our knowledge as educators to help solve problems that may not even be in the library, but outside of where we worked specifically. So that's what we did. So we started by thinking about where or when we would do this. And one of the things that Yayo was very concerned about was that there were other areas on campus that also were going to do things that were similar. So you want to always, the lesson there was make sure that, you don't work in a vacuum. We have an International Student Center, and we discussed our initiative with them. And, we made sure that if there were other areas on campus that were doing this, we would choose a different day and time. But whenever we chose that day and time, it was very consistent, because that was one of the hallmarks that was very important for students to recognize that at this time and on this day, this is always happening. And so that's what we tried to do. And I mean, again, one of the hallmarks and most important parts about this was that we really wanted to create a safe space for students, international students, because as we all know, international students who come are not only grappling with the fact that they're suddenly away from home and in a new culture, but they also have to grapple with a new way maybe to study, or a new way, like Canadian academics work different than other things that they have seen in their home countries. And so they have many, many things that are different and that are coming at them. The idea of doing research was also difficult for some of the students, because they had never had to do it in the way that we do it in Canadian institutions or North American institutions or Western institutions. And so that was also new to them. So we always wanted to put the library in there and library search and research skills, but we quickly realized that students also wanted to know about Canadian culture and how to understand some of the things that were happening to them that they had never experienced before. So it was really important for that safe space element to be there, because we right away said to students, Yayo said, I am an international student, and it took me a long time to understand what was happening at the University of Toronto, in Toronto and in Canada, coming from Japan. And so the students quickly warmed up to her and were able to share with both of us the kinds of things they would see around campus. And so we really worked hard on making sure it was a space where they felt comfortable sharing with us what they needed, what they wanted, and what was on their hearts and minds. We also made sure that students, we chose topics that students wanted to hear about. So this is the same thing. Many of them wanted to hear about Canadian culture, so we made sure to add that. And at the same time, we also made sure that we talked about research. And sometimes we meshed those two things together so that students would both get information literacy and at the same time learn about Canadian culture. And most importantly, it was so that they could practice their English. And so that seems like such a concept that's been forgotten in everything that we've talked about. But ultimately, we always left time for students to be able to practice their English and ask lots of questions. And, again, when you have a safe space, what ends up happening is you're able to correct in a gentle way, and students are receptive to that, because they do want to get it right, and they do want to be able to converse with their peers. So again, it's a space where they feel very comfortable using their voice, and that is one of the things we were doing in this space too, is amplifying the voices of international students. Lastly, communication. And so one of the things that we were very conscious as is in 2013, many students were using Facebook. So it was really to meet them where they were. So any communication, the follow-up communication, yes, we sent it through our International Student Center listserv, because that was the way that we could get to them. But we also made sure that we could get them through Facebook, because at that time, that's what they were using. So any follow-ups and any things like that would be through Facebook, and we would connect the Facebook page to their listserv so that they would have it. And so being very conscious of that. And Roger will talk, and the rest of the panel will talk more about this, because now it could be Instagram. There's so many other sources of social media. And so making sure that even today in 2021, we're able to get to the students in different ways as well. And so those are some of the things that we talked about there. So, as we went through iterations of how we proceeded with this, what happened at the beginning was we had many librarians, because the idea was that we wanted the students to see us as allies, as mentors, as helpers, even outside of what was happening during that hour. And invariably, that is what happens. If we had more time, Sushan could tell you many stories of students who she kept in touch with, and myself as well, both outside of the class, so that we could help them with their projects. We could help them with things that may even not connect to the library, but we could connect them to other campus services. So by building this mentorship with them, it was very important for librarians to be involved. We also, of course, involved the co-op student. That's always stayed, because the co-op student, this is a place where a co-op student can learn, because both the international students are learning and the co-op student is learning. And so it's a safe space for both of them to, expand their teaching wings under librarians who have taught for many years. And so that's been very good. And 2017 to today, librarians continue to work in the English Conversation Group. As you see, the team here is a combination of faculty members, and we have co-ops usually. And so again, this mentorship element, that's very important. As we continue in 2018, our program was recognized as something that was that could be used as a co-curricular credit. So students could get their a book or a thing stamped to say that they have been coming to class. So again, this partnership between the campus was starting. And also connections with the English Language Improvement Program. Now we're talking to them about mentorship and co-op opportunities with that office as well, using the English Conversation Group again as a mentorship and a place where educators can learn more about teaching international students. And I will leave it to my wonderful colleagues to continue with COVID and planning for the 2020 fall semester. And again, these were the questions, it's been such a hands-on activity. Do we now do it online? And, and if we are going to do it online, and we know international students are now taking classes and interacting with us, what are the time differences? These were some of the things that we were very conscious of. So I will leave it to my colleagues to continue. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. I'm very happy to take over the next part of our presentation. My name is Rong. Like you see, I have straight black hair. My room has a lot of sunshine now. I'm going to talk about 3 themes emerging from our library-led online ECG during this time. The first theme is great accessibility. The Blackboard is used to make sure the international students around the world can join the ECG. Blackboard is our university web-based teaching software. Students have already access to it and being comfortable with it. And we always enhance communication and students' engagement. One of our staff has been assigned to respond students' daily inquiries. At the end of each semester, a feedback questionnaire was sent to students. It included questions about participants' experience and opinion of English Conversation Group, and provide a space for recommended future topic and suggestion for improvement. The second theme is greater flexibility. We have a multi-dimensional culture that blends different background of students around the world. Like Karen talked about, we have multiple topics such as Canadian history, sharing with experience and tips during COVID-19. We also set up the break room to let all the students have a chance to talk. The third very important part is cultivating ECG community. We increase the students self-enroll our Blackboard because the crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic caused the isolation. So we use this site to communicate with students. We also use the social media as another highly effective way to building our ECG communication, except for promotion purpose. The interactive nature of social media has been talked about Karen. I'll pass the next part to Roger.
Hi everyone, my name is Roger Recca. I have black hair, black beard, some glasses, and I'm behind this yellow background.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Roger. You would just get 2 minutes to wrap up your presentation?
Sounds good. I will do it.
Perfect.
So I'll use the next couple of minutes just to wrap up by describing some of the outcomes and challenges that we faced with delivering our English conversation group, in particular this last couple of semesters with COVID, and some surprises actually. So, typically for English conversation group, we have around a dozen to 20 students who attend in person, and we saw our numbers sort of keep up during that time. And in fact, some students have even reported that there's sort of this improved access to our English conversation group that they previously didn't have before with our delivery in person. So students had found in the past that it was challenging to actually make it across campus and join us for our sessions, or they didn't want to have to come to campus just for English conversation group when they had no other classes on time during that time. So the ability to access virtually was actually something that improved their access to English conversation group. Conversation can also be difficult for some students to have, especially those who aren't comfortable with speaking English on a regular basis. Some students reported to us after our last semester that they were actually more willing to engage in conversation if they didn't have to have their webcams on. So that wasn't something that we required of the students, and because of that, some had said that that actually enabled them to engage in the conversation and talk with others. One of the things that we're most proud about with English Conversation Group all the time, but especially now, is that we can sort of build a sense of community and socialization with these students. So coming to a new country is very difficult for anybody, but to have to juggle that with academics is especially challenging for our students. And now in a world where we're sort of very socially distant, and in fact, a lot of our students are not even in the country, students have reported that this was a place where they could make friends and they could build that community. Challenges with this particular year, of course, I'm sure we're all facing issues with time zones, but we tried to provide as much asynchronous content as possible on Blackboard. We have network issues, of course, but most challenging probably is just keeping the conversation going in an online environment. And we've tried to, the issue, oh, sorry, time up, okay. There's always issues with talking to people with those tiles, but we tried to get around that by welcoming people when they joined, calling out people by name, doing icebreakers, and then having moderators really lead our discussions. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to answer a bit more about what we've been doing and our outcomes and conclusions during our Q&A at the end of the session, but I will leave it there. Shuzhen, did you want to wrap up, or we could just finish right here?
I have to finish at here.
Okay, perfect. We'll just leave it there.
Yeah, good.
Thank you so much, Roger. Can we move to Emily and Mark, please?
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'll share our slides. I need to reload them because again, it just seems to be going off. So just 1 second. Yes. All right.
Perfect.
We shall start now.
Start now.
Who are you, Emily?
I'm Emily Saline, and I work at the University of the Arts London. I'm an educational developer in academic enhancement.
Hi, and I'm Mark Ingham. I also work at the University of Arts London at the London College of Communication in the Design School, and I'm a reader in critical and nomadic pedagogies. And today we're going to talk a bit about a project called Becoming Lost and Found in Translation that was started in 2018. There's a lovely quote here from Bell Hooks, amongst others in our research project, but I think that's quite inspiring, that we really want to see this project as making no students invisible, that they all belong. And being to the keynotes before this was a really emphasized quite strongly. So the project Becoming Lost and Found in Translation started off with me deciding that I didn't want to have an office and after a sabbatical and coming back to the London College of Communication, and I decided to sit in the galleries, which is the most fabulous thing I've ever done in my whole life, and not to have an office. I communicated with so many more people. It was absolutely brilliant. This was during an exhibition called the London Design Festival, and this is where we presented the design school's new manifesto. We decided within the school that the design school needed an identity, and one of the things we thought was to have a very strong manifesto. And what you see here is a very fuzzy picture. I'm sorry, it's obviously lost something in translation through the digital. And this is how the design school manifesto was initially presented in that first exhibition at LCC. Now, what was interesting about me sitting in the rooms was that the students came up to me. Some of them knew me, some of them were new students. Often they asked me the way to rooms. LCC is a very complex building with multiple stories. But one thing they did say right at the beginning was they really loved the design school manifesto. They thought it was actually fantastic. They felt that they started to belong to a school. It made them feel like they had an identity. But very, very quickly, and this was almost immediately, they did ask a very, very pertinent question. Why is it always in English? Now, at LCC and UAL, we have a large number of students who are not from the UK and speak other languages. So that started me thinking about why did we just even not realize that we could actually put this manifesto into various languages. So all I did was I sent out an email to the whole of LCC, that's 5,000 students, asking them, could you translate the design school manifesto for us? Within 2 days, we had 25 translations, which was quite extraordinary. And beyond that, it made people, the students and staff, very, very aware of language, of translation, of being a part of a place, also being a part of a place that understood the difficulties of language, the difficulty of translation. So moving on from that, it's gone through a large number of iterations, and so we haven't got much time to go through all of them. But a couple of years later, we had another exhibition in the London Design Festival, and this was to show some of the results that had happened during the year through the group of students who decided to take over the research project or became collaborators in the research project. And this is where I met Emily, who is an expert in translation. And we started to really discuss this idea of what translation means in terms of the politics of power, of metacognition, of what happens when you go through a series of ideas of translation. And what we realized was that translation wasn't just to do with language, but it was also to do with how you transition from one moment to another. So literally going from one state to another. So we set up opposite the last slide, opposite this slide, we set up a wall where students could come along and start to translate the manifesto in multiple different ways. That was in ways from drawing to translating in language, etc., etc. So we had these 12 fake pieces of paper on the wall that students could come along in the corridor and start writing. What was actually wonderful about it, which was unexpected, was students started to communicate with each other through this almost sort of weirdly online space. It was offline, obviously, but it was online space where they started leaving notes for each other. So they didn't know each other, so they would write next to each other's ideas of what was going on. So here you can see some students who are engaged in drawing, writing in their own languages, writing to each other through the medium of just a pencil and paper. Again, it was very active, very interesting. And I think what it did was start to develop ideas of communication and other sort of ideas. And we got these wonderful drawings coming up. So people got really engaged with the idea of spending some time on a wall within the galleries and actually drawing on them. I think when I was talking to students, they really loved the idea of being allowed a voice, and a voice in this term in writing, but a voice that they could actually express themselves. So there was some quite political stuff going on there. There was quite some moans and groans, but also as well as some other things. What then happened was that me and Emily got together and decided to do a research project and get some funding, which was quite important. This is around about 2019, beginning of 2020. And the idea was to produce a workbook for all the 1,500 students in the design school, which was had the design school manifesto in there in multiple languages, but also space within this workbook for translation to happen, for doodling to happen, for drawing to happen. So it was almost like a gift of a sketchbook, but with a sort of semi-content in there that could be collaborated with. What then happened, we got a group of students together, some graphic design students who were working on the project. As we know, the pandemic approached and came along, and they quite rightly said, well, why aren't we going to put this online? Why aren't we going to make this digital? What's the point of having a physical object? So we set up two things. The first one was an Instagram account called blah, blah, blah translation, which if you've got a camera ready, you can actually go to it there. I'll put the link in a bit. And so they said that this would be a really interesting way to start off by doing some interactive work with the whole of the UAL, which is sort of 19,000 students, and start to get them involved in this notion of translation. So they did a wonderful job of creating a far better graphic designed element than I could ever do, and that led on to some other things. And one of the other things that it led on to, here's some other ones, is a Padlet that we used, which went in conjunction with the Instagram. Now the Padlet became a very interactive space where you could start to put where you came from and start to translate things and then join up with other people. So again, I'll put the link into the chat later on, and you can please have a go at this interactive thing and put your dots up over the map. And I think that because this is a conference about online stuff, it became a really interesting space, which we leave sometimes, and sometimes there's 2 or 3 things that happen. Sometimes we then promote it a bit more, and more sort of busyness happens. I think it's a really interesting thinking about asynchronous work. It's actually quite an idea that asynchronous stuff can happen when you're not there as a teacher. So that's a very brief overview of the project. We've done conferences about this. We're doing more research about this, and Emily will tell you a bit more later on. And I'll hand you now over to Emily, who will discuss the wider context of the project.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to go back onto this map, just to give you a little bit of context about University of the Arts London and the students we have, in the university. So it's billed as the Europe's largest art and design specialist institution. As Mark was saying, we've got about 19,000 students. They all come from 130 countries, and in 2021 we had only 45% of the students were home students, i.e. UK students, and all the others were international students. 16.6% were EU, and 38 were more international, out of EU. And in the design school where this project took place, we had more than 56% of our students were international. So this project really is quite an important way for us to try and work on trying to promote students' belonging and building community. So this sense really of being part of a community is really closely linked to the and belonging has got a really close link to students' attainment in their education, and that's one of our huge priorities of our university. We at University of the Arts we have noticed some awarding differentials between students depending on their categories. So and that's something which unfortunately is happening across the sector in the UK. And so the work we're trying to do is trying to really fit within that effort to reduce awarding differentials. What I mean by awarding differentials is the difference in attainment between students, how students the proportion of students getting a good degree depending on their characteristics. So typically an international student would do 14% below home students, for example, and when it comes to students of color and white students, there's a 16% gap. So there's really a pressing work to be done there, and the university has done quite a lot, is doing quite a lot to try and do this work. So one of the projects that the university has been doing, and has been led by the student union at the university, is this zine, two zines actually, called Decolonizing the Curriculum. And that's a collaboration between student and staff, and they've been really contributing to this zine and putting through, contributing some artwork, text on the themes of race, identity, inclusion, exclusion, and those elements. Thank you, Raka. So here's an example of one of the things that was included. So this map that sort of echoes our map from our, and shows the relative dimension of maps, and depending where you look at it, and questions really a sort of a Western-centric, global North focused view of the world, and by extension questions English as a dominant language. And the other element I think is quite interesting here is a contribution from a member of the English support team who has emphasized this question of the language as a barrier. And we should really emphasize that this barrier is not just for international students, but also for so-called native students, native English students who may not master the codes and of a language, and may be excluded in the same way, as international students. It's as if language was really perpetuating these hierarchies of knowledge and power, denounced by thinkers such as Bourdieu, for example, in reproduction. So just to conclude, really, about what, go back to translation here. Why translation? It's because translation really questions this hegemony. First of all, hegemony of English, the power. It emphasizes the power relationships that are at work in using language, and starts saying what is starts asking questions about, can we appropriate, can we make this manifesto ours, can we appropriate and own the text, and this really is the key of our work. So what is the original, what is the source, and can we really disrupt hierarchies, and can we really emphasize and give students power to take ownership of their own learning and of the space they're in, both virtually, online, but also physically. And that's us. And just remains for us to really thank you for being in translation with us for a few minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. And,
thank you so much, Mark and Emily. It was wonderful listening about your translating experiences. We will talk about more in the Q&A session for sure. Now I will move on with my presentation. Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Raka Zabin, as I mentioned earlier, and I am a doctoral student at the Faculty of Education at Brock University, Ontario, Canada. The topic of my research is the lessons learned from COVID-19 and the implications for LMS use to support student success. In order to smoothly transition to the online educational platforms after the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, the integration of technologically enabled LMS becomes vital for the developing countries to keep up with the dynamic international educational context. So I am myself an international student from Bangladesh studying in Canada, And what I have figured out in my country for almost 1.5 years, all the educational institutions has been closed down, and there has been no significant movement with education. All the educational institutions starting from primary school till higher education has been closed down. And this is because of the lack of proper online educational platform in countries like Bangladesh. And I feel it is very important that we implement those online platforms in order to smoothly transition into this new environment of education. With the sudden shift from the classroom in many parts of the globe, some are wondering whether the adoption of online learning would continue to persist post-pandemic and how such a shift would impact the worldwide education market. Even before COVID-19, we can see that the global edtech investment was reaching to US 18.66 billion in 2019, and the overall market for online education was projected to reach 350 billion by 2025. Whether it is language app, virtual tutoring, video conferencing tools, or online learning software, there has been a significant surge in usage of the technological platforms since the COVID-19 has came in, and which tends to move forward. Now, if we look into the type of technology adopters all over the world, we see that the curve is quite unique, and we have people throughout the whole diagram, as you can see in the graph. So there would be people who are very willing to adopt the technology, and there are always people who are not that willing to accept the technology or adopt into the technological platforms. With the COVID-19 lockdown in place, the transition to online learning has been, what's wrong? I'm sorry, something is going wrong with my slides. So the reason why I talk about this is based on the UNESCO educational projects, because UNESCO has been working in all these Asian Pacific region to work out the lack of alignment between the coordination of the national ICT in educational policy and the actual teacher development on how effectively ICT can be used in order to develop the teaching pedagogy and student learning. These are based on the UNESCO projects that are in place regarding the UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education, and the other project is based on leveraging ICT for achieving Education 2030. I have provided the links in this chat, so if you want, you can just take a look. One-time off-site teaching learning hardly create any impact on teacher. So in that case, if we have instructional practices which are appropriate in terms of the ICT field, which would be available for the students, which would be available for the teachers in order to access even later, that would actually support the learning, and that would actually help the teachers to support ICT in education policies at the practice level. So being an international student from Bangladesh and being an international educator from Bangladesh, these are some of the educational challenges that I have discovered through my own experience. And I believe these are some of the challenges that are persisting not only in Bangladesh, but in several countries that are going through these challenges regarding the implementation of online educational platforms. So improving educational oversight and accountability, enhancing teacher training, updating curriculum resources, improving classroom assessment strategies and formal examinations, and foster 21st century skills. So if I look at it in a nutshell, we can see that the students from these developing countries are actually suffering because the teachers in these countries are actually not properly trained in order to move on with the online learning and teaching environment. The curriculum resources that are available are quite traditional, and we really don't have the online resources or the online curriculum-based learning in those countries. Regarding assessment, we are lagging really behind because all the assessment are taken in a formal environment where it is always face-to-face, and still now we are struggling to come up with assessment strategies that would help us conduct the exams online. And I think this is actually making these students from the countries lag behind. And when students from these countries come to compete in an online platform where we have other international students from all over the world, these students are actually lagging behind in competition with the other students because of these lackings that they have been going through for so many years. According to the UNESCO ICT framework, it is crucial to design and implement effective evidence-based ICT in education policies and master plans. UNESCO works to ensure activities on the ground to respond to countries and local communities' unique needs that are guided by collaborative and consensus-driven approaches. And UNESCO works to support the development of ICT in education policies and master plans to help the government and the stakeholders leverage ICT and all the information and all the support and resources required in order to achieve the global sustainable goal for education 2030. I feel this is also very crucial because one of the common challenges for developing countries regarding the development of ICT framework or regarding the development of resources lies in funding. And if UNESCO is supporting the government and the stakeholders in order with the ICT with the incorporation of ICT with the required resources and funding, I think it's a very good project, and it is a very good step that is taken by the UNESCO ICT framework in alignment with their Global Sustainable Educational Goal 4. Now, what are the needed educational innovations if we look into the developing countries' challenges? And if we look into the challenges, I would say these challenges have been there for quite some time, but it got more prominent and visible with the impact of COVID-19 in the region of the Asia Pacific region, because countries like Bangladesh, countries like India have been struck with COVID-19 quite strongly. And while all these schools and all the educational systems have been shut down for quite some time now, we really understand the need for educational innovation in those countries. So now I would go through a few points about the importance and the needed educational innovations. Update and consolidate learning resources. I think this is a very important point for the updating of the learning resources, because all these countries are still leaning towards the very traditional method of learning, very traditional learning resources. And it is high time that we come out of those traditional notions and really try more flexible delivery models rather than sticking to the traditional notion that we have been following. Enhancing student and parent communication. This is another very important aspect, because in those countries, the parents are often out of the scenario of education, and there is not much connection with the student and parent, or there would be very formal parents and teachers meeting once in 2-3 months where the student and parent, or the parent and the teacher, would get to interact. So if we have the online educational system, I would say that it would be even beneficial for the parents to take a look at the students' development. Support ongoing teacher professional development. This is another important aspect, because as I mentioned earlier, the aspect of teachers' development and training is almost absent. And it has been going on for quite some time that the teachers are not properly trained, or they are just going on with their prior training. And I think they should come up with new training in order to help these teachers move on to the new teaching environment. And I think this would also increase the efficiency and reduce the cost that has been rising in these countries. So perhaps as we talk about the building blocks of solution, I have raised it in terms of this pyramid. And the first thing that we need to do is raise awareness for the benefits and the long-term impacts of e-learning. Then I move on to the framework where we talk about the policy support on how at national level this e-learning policy can be implemented. Then we move on to the infrastructure, which is another important thing in terms of the low-cost devices that are available for the countries. Then we move to digital content, training, and finally the implementation of LMS. The benefits of using LMS is varied out in so many different ways. It is important for the quality of education. It would improve the quality of education. It would give flexibility to the learning arrangement. It would bring flexibility to the parent and teacher and student communication. And eventually, it would also increase the ICT knowledge and development of the students in these countries. Access to high quality curriculum would allow the students to have 24/7 access to the learning material. The students will be able to go through the learning material at their convenient time other than school hours, which is very common in countries like Canada or in countries like UK, but which is very, very rare in countries like Bangladesh, for example. Availability of updated and upgraded curriculum resources. I think I mentioned this already. Access to high quality and free OER resources. Online educational resources is another very important thing that we come across every day in our education system in the developed countries. But this is very, very rare in countries like Bangladesh and other developing countries. And I think it is very important that these countries incorporate the aspect of online educational resources so that the students can access to these materials, the teachers can access to these materials all the time, and it would be very helpful for them to go through it and also reduce the cost for paying for their textbooks. Finally, innovative instructional and assessment. So this would facilitate educational delivery models. So we can have several delivery models. It would support innovative instructional approaches, lessons grounded in science and technology. It wouldn't be lessons grounded in traditional methods, and where in countries like Bangladesh and other countries, it is very traditional that it is more of bookish knowledge. So we are always influenced and dependent on the book. Then we have the multimodal learning plan that is only possible if we have an online learning management system. The administrative benefits is also an important aspect which can be highlighted in terms of LMS, which is not possible without that, regarding accountability, regarding quality assurance, and also the administrative oversight about attendance, learning analytics, and academic achievement. This is not possible, and I would say it's possible, but it's very challenging for even the administrative staff to keep a track on all these things, and it would be much easier if we have the online learning system for these countries. And finally, I would say the impact of educational innovation for all the developing countries would actually create a leapfrog moment for educational advancement, reducing the technological gap for these students when they come into a developed country for their higher education, and they won't feel that they are lagging behind because of their lack of ICT knowledge. And that would foster the educated workforce for these developing countries and would also help these individual and the societal to have economic advancement and development in these countries. So that's all from my end. Thank you so much for listening. And now we will move on to the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and go ahead. Otherwise, I would just go through the chat and go through the questions. Thank you so much, Gurbinder. I'm glad that you enjoyed the presentation.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Emily. And she said, you know, in her school, there has a 45% of students, you know, still work at home. So which kind of the, you know, the system, you know, in UK they are using for online teaching? I just want to know that. So Emily, you mute yourself.
Yes, sorry. When I said when I took them, what we call home students in the UK are students from the UK. It doesn't necessarily mean they work at home. So they're just I think the figure I mentioned was just students in you know, living in the UK or from the UK. However, well, we've been during the pandemic, we've been having working through blended learning quite a lot. So a mix of both. Apart from when we had a full lockdown where everything was online. But because we are an art and design institution, we benefited from some slightly different rules when it came to work with the students. So we were able to have the students on site for some of the time. But as Mark is saying, we use Teams, we use Blackboard Collaborate, we use Moodle, and we use a whole host of additional collaborative work platforms such as so we use Padlet, for example, Miro. So Mark is putting everything in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
This is so insightful that when I see the schools using Teams, Blackboard, and Moodle, and when I go back and compare to the countries that I lived all through my life and where I don't have any, where the students back there don't have any of these platforms, it seems like, oh, there's so much missing. And I feel I'm so privileged that I came here to study and I'm getting the exposure to all these platforms. And I feel so bad for the students of my country, think, oh, it is very important that our government actually work on implementing these LMS and these online platforms so that the education system back home won't be at a halt for such a long time due to these lack of resources. So thank you so much, Emily.
Just to add to that, we really looked at lo-fi ways of working. This is something in pedagogical terms I certainly pushed, and lots of us pushed right at the beginning, saying we will have students who will not be able to, for various reasons, for where they are, for technological reasons, for the fact they haven't got a laptop. So really push this idea that you can communicate without all these platforms. And I think it's something that we really need to continue on with. So I put, and I'm not joking, that there's a colleague of mine, Zai, at I think he's actually at LCC, who's done a very interesting research project on the power of email. And we may all laugh about that because we thought, oh God, we've got so much email. But actually, it is a way of talking to each other asynchronously, synchronously. And I think it's a really interesting way of going back and not just jumping on what some people call the technological bandwagon. And we need to put the pedagogical horse first. So we need to look at the teaching. And the teaching is obviously individual. So if we're not capturing all our students, then we're failing. So I think that we're very conscious, and I know Emily's very conscious of that fact, that if we are leaving out even just one student from this sort of way of learning, then we really need to find ways of doing that.
Yeah, the aspect of inclusion, right? So that we include everyone. That's so important. Any other questions? If you want to unmute yourself and go ahead.
I've got a question.
I see that Fatme already posted the poll. So if you have some time, you can just join the poll. Sorry, Mark. Well,
I've got a question for the whole group. I mean, and you don't have to answer this because it's a bit slightly provocative. So at the end of our project, halfway through our project, we did some research about English as a lingua franca. And there's a writer called Robert Phillipson who talks rather than English as being a lingua franca, but actually a lingua frankensteiner. So he talks about English being a place where, yes, it's great, we can all communicate with it, but also can destroy languages. And I think we're quite interested in the politics and the power of languages that can can have. So I think that our project in becoming lost and found in translation is developing into something that where, as Bell Hooks says, where voices need to be heard and not voices are just in English. I think English can be very dominant. So the question is, do you, from experience of English being something that's spoken by groups of students, but I want to hear a classroom that I don't hear English. Sorry, that's not a question. That's just a statement. I don't want that to happen all the time. So I'm saying this quite deliberately because I teach thesis. My PhD students, I've got 12 of them. They will have to write in English. I just think this is almost like going back to assessment. So if you're assessing always in a language that's not yours, or the other way around, then we're going to get some questions. Anyway, that's just a slightly provocative statement about why should we use English anymore?
That's a very valuable insight, Mark, because I truly agree that why should we being evaluated in a language that's not my own language, right? Because if we were asking to evaluate someone else who evaluate my language, for example, and that person wouldn't even be able to speak even a sentence, right? Whereas I am being evaluated on his language or her language, which is not my language. So that's very interesting. Karen?
And I think a lot of the time, like, we see this, right? When we're teaching international students, I'm going to use the example of China because that's the one that I'm most familiar with. You know, we sit with students in a classroom and, you know, we're teaching them, for example, you know, how to do research on something particular. And we're sitting next to them and we say to them, use this word. And you can tell, like, they're not sure how to spell it. You're the person in power right next to them, the stress of like, and so sometimes I'm like, oh, this is, oh yeah, no, spell it like this. And you know, they laugh and they say, if I was speaking Chinese right now, like, I feel like you're telling me how to spell a word and I'm in a university and I'm like, oh no, it's okay. Like, English isn't my first language either. Like, I totally get it. Like, don't worry, you know, but it's like this feeling of inferiority because you're trying to get it right, but it's hard, right? And I think there's a lot to be said for that, right? Even as myself, like, I sound like English is my first language, but I often translate from French and people go, what did you say? And I'm kind of like, but you got what I meant. Like, why can't we just move on, right? And so I think about that with the students who are learning English or who know English, but who are just having trouble because they don't have all the vocabulary that we have, right? And so, you know, being very conscious of that, and it's okay, because are you getting across? Did you learn the thought process? Are you critically thinking? That can happen in many languages and in many ways, so I agree.
What's interesting here as well is how, you know, language formats as well the way you're thinking though. And so you get into certain ways of thinking because you're using a certain language. I don't know if anyone experiences that. And so the students are also, I mean, in just questioning, in questioning the use of a language or opening up to others, we're showing different ways of thinking. So it's this opening up, which I quite like as well.
I think it's like going back to the first speakers about they brilliantly had their brilliant project in the library. I thought it was absolutely fabulous, and creating those safe spaces where people can do it. So I think going first is always sometimes difficult, but I quite like to ask a question to the presenters from that fabulous presentation about perhaps expand more on the cafe idea, the sort of informal idea of learning language. I don't know if anybody wants to chip in.
I'm happy to, unless some of my team members want to. Roger, Rong, Sushan.
Karen, you can go ahead. You got this. Unless Rong wants to go.
Go Rong, come on.
From me, I'm a international student before, and I take part in the English conversation group. I learned lots of teaching experience from Karen Shuzhen and Roger. And yeah, I'm very thankful for them for them give me the experience, and I'm very appreciate for all they did for all the international students to help us to improve the English. Yeah, even like using their lunchtime or something. Yeah, when I was student, when I take part in this group, I totally understand it's not an easy job. It's a hard job. Lots of yeah, lots of theory, lots of understanding there. That's what I want to see.
I think that's something we try to emphasize as much as possible in the way that we plan English Conversation Group, is that at the University of Windsor, here at our institution, we have a lot of resources for formal learning of English, right? We have an English Learning Center. We have courses that international students can take if they need to improve their English proficiency. But for us, we are there to really provide that. I don't know. It's sort of like this non-sterile environment where we can speak, where we can have conversation, right? It's not really focused on English as a language; it's focused on conversation. And almost learning English is like a byproduct out of that process. Whereas what we're really focusing on is developing that community, developing a sense of socialization, a place to make friends. And then these learning outcomes, which are, maybe you get a little bit better English, maybe you get, a bit of knowledge around the topics that we're discussing, around culture, around academic life, and around learning, maybe of information seeking, here in the library. But those are really those byproducts. And I think the informal setting that we have, which I never really described as cafe style, but it sort of is. We do it at lunchtime, and people come sometimes with drink and food, and we sit in this environment. And now virtually we just sit there, and we're on our computers during lunch. So it is sort of like a cafe. And yeah, I mean, I think it's worked for us. Yeah.
And I think it's really valuable because these actually informal settings make it more valuable for the international students, because I am an international student myself, and I feel that formal setting is sometimes that might make me uncomfortable, or that might make me feel, oh, I might say something which is inappropriate. Yeah. So I very agree with you, Roger, that the informal setting, like just for lunch, or this sets up the conversation and creates the field which is more comfortable for the international students to join in. So that's very important.
Yeah, I just want to see, sorry, go ahead, Roger.
No, Suzanne, please.
Yeah, I just want to see, because, from my English Conversation Group, we made friends, even outside of the school. Karen and I will have the friends. They're from China, from India. We become like very close friends. We hang out like lunch or whatever together. And also, I want to see English Conversation Group is a bridge, which is the last slide we have. With the bridge, we building this community with the international student and the librarian. So like, we want to make a student feel, oh, library is the place, and is the safer place that they can stay with. They can ask us questions for whatever they want to ask. Then we will have a better answer for them. We never say, no, I don't know, I have no idea. We never say like that. So that's why, I think the English Conversation Group gave us the chance. I really appreciate Yayo, Karen, she mentioned at the beginning of the time, and for how we do this, and the time on, the Roger, Rong, and another librarian, we are drawing for these kind of things. We enjoy with the international student, because I was an international student, so I know the feeling. When you move to the new country, you know nothing, and you have somebody prepared something for you about the culture, even for the for the restaurant and something like that. So then they feel warm. So we are warming, welcome them, and they are very trust us. Then they can do the better job. So that's our thinking. Yeah.
I mean, also really, Mark and Emily, your presentation was it very interesting. I think for me personally, there's so much to language that we interact with all the time. English actually isn't my first language. I moved here when I was around 6, 7, and I spoke Albanian at the time, so I went to your map and I found the Albanian translation of the design manifesto was really interesting. But to me, I think I'm still like I have all this personal experience with learning a new language, and I'm starting to pick up on some of the things you said, like around how the language also shapes meaning around the message you're trying to send, right? But I won't lie, like things that you sort of described are still a bit abstract to me. But I am thinking about like how we might apply that, here in my place of work at the library, which is that we try to be like that institution that is, this academic center on campus. We want to be very compassionate. We want to be accepting of people. And I wonder, almost everything that we do with messaging at the library, is in English. And if we want, and we do have a very significant international student population here. And I just wonder, so you took the very deliberate route of taking your school's manifesto and translating that into other languages. And I wonder if you could just maybe elaborate on the reasons why you did that. And sorry if I missed that in your presentation, but to me, it's just, I feel like that's something that, for us here at the library, I'd like to explore a bit. What messaging can we sort of translate into those languages of our students here, right? But maybe if you just explain more about like the reasoning why you even started that sort of begin with.
From the students.
From the students, yeah.
Yeah, so the students, as I said right at the beginning, it was quite interesting. Students came in and said, "It's a fantastic manifesto, but why is it just in English?
Yeah. Okay.
Why isn't it?" So I put in the chat about learning from each other. So that it was from them that I realised that it's that blind spot you have when you're doing something that you think is the most fantastic thing in the world. You think, great, we've got this brilliant manifesto that's going to change the world and create design school for whatever. And then you actually forget that you're leaving out lots of people. But what it did do for us, and Emily will come in this, is that it made students two things. That the project was more metacognitive. It was all about what happens. I think you mentioned this, Roger, about what happens when you translate one thing into another. Now, whether that's another language or a brief or a design brief or some teaching things that we've done, what happens to that? What actually happens to your thinking? And I noticed this right early on. Oh yes, I can do that. I'll translate that to you into whatever. And then suddenly the zone came down like this, because it's quite a complex manifesto. It's not easy. So the zone went down, and they went, all right, this is going to take me a bit longer than I think, because I'm having to do this and this. And what was lovely about it was that there were groups of students who were coming together having fantastic arguments. We don't have the word design in Italian. Is it? What is it? What is it? How do we do this? I mean, it was absolutely, to me, that was the sort of the joy of that. So the arguments between students who spoke the same language, but then other students who were then starting to come in and say, oh, this means this, and then we have to do this. What I did very naughtily in the beginning was translate it in from Google Translate. So which two things happened, made everybody laugh, but also very annoyed. And so that, I think, was quite a good trigger. So Google Translate just got that completely, utterly just wrong. But what I think it does is it created a sense of belonging right away. I said, look, that's fine. Don't me and Emily were talking about it. So don't retranslate it back into English. And we've got this idea that the workbook we were going to do was going to have no English in it whatsoever. Well, perhaps Emily would disagree with me, but there was this idea that actually was no English there at all, which I thought was rather fantastic, because I think actually all our students can learn from each other and learn different languages, different thoughts, different ways of speaking. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, Roger, but it was one of those sort of serendipitous moments where you think, oh, okay, this is interesting. And what has happened, I think unconsciously, we had a show the next year for our postgraduate shows, and there was lots and lots of different translations floating all over the place, which was absolutely wonderful. It was absolutely fabulous. So, I don't know if you want to add to that, Emily.
I think you've answered, very well. I had a question for Raka, or a comment to you, Raka. I mean, I just thought that your presentation was really, really interesting, particularly something that you highlighted, which was that how vital. I mean, we're not just talking, how vital the access to technology is. For example, in the example of Bangladesh, is that or no education whatsoever. So Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out because again, in a very Western-centric kind of approach, we talk about how we can blend things, and in the case you were talking about, it's quite something else, isn't it?
Yeah, so because I feel the greatest challenge for students from Bangladesh is they are already lacking the resources in order to join into these platforms or in order to join into these conversations, right? So today I feel I am privileged because even being from Bangladesh, because I came to Canada, because I'm a part of Brock University, I got all these resources. I am privileged because I have that exposure now. But whereas I feel quite bad about the people back home in my country, the students in Bangladesh, because they are lacking all those resources, and that is what they cannot even compete to the world. They cannot even come up and share their knowledge and experience. So that lack of exposure is already happening, and we cannot have an integrated world education platform because of these lack of resources. Because you were talking about integrating everyone, and we learn from each other the value about each other's knowledge and the value of collaboration. So I feel that is completely missing for some of those countries because of their lack of resources, because of their lack of technological innovation. And I feel it is very important that the government and the stakeholders of these countries actually think about incorporating those online educational resources, because this is not just the thing about COVID-19. COVID-19 actually made it more visible to us for these countries that the need is so important, that it is so vital that we incorporate those resources. But then again, this is something that would stay post-pandemic. And it is very important so that these students actually gets the resources so that they can actually come and compete with the rest of the world. They can show that they do have something valuable to share.
Yeah. And it's a reminder as well that, again, we're using certain norms, so we compete by the standards of one group and not the others. Yeah, really, really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
I'll just look at the chat and then we will just wrap up this session. Oh, I see something interesting from Mark about tourism and world Wi-Fi. That sounds fascinating.
So that was a sort of joke, but if we're going to spend 28 million quid to go up on a rocket, I think that's whatever. That's just rich people getting off on stuff. But perhaps we do politics right at the end of the conversation.
That's true.
Well, education is political. Yeah.
Yeah. Politics plays a dominant role in education. Okay, so it's almost 12:35. I think it's time to wrap up this session. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, the presenters, for their valuable insights. And you are most welcome to stay back and join the Concurrent session 2, where we have some other lovely presentations. And hope you will join us tomorrow as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a brilliant host.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's fantastic. Well done.
Thank you. I couldn't put my camera, I couldn't put my mic on. Yes, thank you. It's been a really lovely, lovely event. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Emily. Have a good night. Is it night at your place?
Yeah, it's early evening. Yeah.
Okay.
Soiree time, I call it.
Yes, 5:30. Yeah.
Okay. That's wonderful.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.